Okay, the reading for this week is Konjaku Monogatarishū, one of the great collections of Setsuwa, compiled around 1120, so right in the smack in the middle of the Heian period. I will make a more formal study guide and distribute that and put the link to that in the description below at some point. For now, I just have kind of a fragmentary study guide that I put together, some questions to think about as Nicole, my assistant, reads not the entire work, because that would take probably a week to get through the whole thing, but some of the more salient and famous Setsuwa, or parable tales, from this collection. So let me just introduce it briefly, and then I have to run to my seminar class, which is already underway, so I gotta get out of here real quick. Konjaku Monogatarishū, translated by Minamoto. There are several translations starting in the early 20th century, I think. There's one that came out in the 1950s. We will be using the original, which is on the right side of your PDF file, the original classical Japanese. And then Uri's, I think is her last name, Uri's more recent translation from the 1980s, I think, on the left side. So they have both the classical Japanese original and the Uri translation on the left side. And we will read several of the, I think 20 or 25 of the Setsuwa tales in all is on your PDF. Just very briefly, compiled around 1120. There are 31 volumes in total. Volumes 8, 18, and 21 are missing, so nobody knows what is included in those. But we do know the general structure of the work is it starts in India. So the first 5 volumes of the 31 volumes take place in India, and these are Buddhist tales. And then after those 5 volumes, it moves onward to China. So it traces the actual trajectory, or the actual course that Buddhism took from India to China and eventually to Japan. So the next 5 volumes take place in China. And these are Buddhist and Confucian tales as well. So there's some kind of Confucian elements and Confucian themes mixed in with the Buddhist elements in these 5 volumes. And then the final third major chunk or section of the work takes place in Japan. So these are the 10 volumes of Buddhist tales and 11 volumes of secular tales as well. So the Japanese threw some tales in there that are kind of more moral didactic tales, but not from a Buddhist angle. In total, there are 1,039 secular and sacred tales gathered from India, China, and Japan, included in this collection. And a Setsuwa, I've already used that word several times, a Setsuwa, written with the kanji setsu, me no setsu plus hanase, is often translated into English as a parable tale. All right, some particular areas of culture that you need to keep in mind every time it comes up and underline it is the Lotus Sutra, the Hokkekyo, as we say in Japanese, the Lotus Sutra, one of the main sutras of Mahayana Buddhism. Shintoism appears not too often, but it appears at several points in the Setsuwa. Confucianism, of course, features prominently in the work. The temples that appear, every time a temple appears, underline it and make a note of where the temple is located, which sect of Buddhism it's associated with, and so forth. The Kannon Bodhisattva, or the Guanyin Bodhisattva, as we say in Chinese, is one of the more important bodhisattvas, or bosatsu, that appears in the work. Underline that, and we'll go over that in class. The law of cause and effect. Inga Oho, as we say in Japanese, Inga Oho, law of cause and effect, is an important sort of idea in Buddhism, obviously, and it's especially important in the context of this work. The Bodhisattva boundless space, or the Kokuzo Bosatsu, often appears in the Setsuwa as well. All right, just very briefly now, some of the questions on the study guide that I put together. Number 1, make note of all the characters that appear in the work, both the animal characters and the human characters, including those that appear first in disguise and then are revealed to be something else later. Number 2, what is the point of view of the narrative? Is it first person? Is it third person? Where is the focalization point? Is it on certain characters but not others? Is there temporal distance between the narrative present, the narrator who is relaying the story, and the events being described, or are they almost sort of simultaneous? Number 3, what are some of the symbols that appear in the work? Fire, for example, appears quite often. So the symbols, make a list of all the symbols, all the archetypes, the motifs, the literary tropes, and so forth that appear in the work. For example, onryo, or kind of vengeful spirits, often appear. Bloody tears is a motif that appears throughout the Setsuwa. Waiting, or a spurned woman who's waiting for her man to come, but he does not come. This kind of archetypal female character, appears throughout revelation in a dream. So dreams often tell give sort of hints of what will happen in the future. Note the use of dreams. Turtles also appear with certain meanings. Make a note of those as well. Number 4, what are the morals that are promulgated in each of the Setsuwa? Are they the same throughout, or is there a different moral promulgated in each of the Setsuwa? Make a note of that. And note its relation to enlightenment, Satori. Its relation to Buddhist teachings and doctrines. Its relation to the Lotus Sutra. And animal ethics, too, is an important theme that appears in the work. People who are cruel to animals are often punished in the work. Karmic retribution, Inga Oho, as I mentioned above, is very important in Buddhism and one of the major themes of this work as well. So note each instance of karmic retribution, heavenly wrath, karmic bonds, sexuality and passions. What is the work trying to teach us about bonno and sexuality and passions and so forth? The Amida Buddha, filial piety is another theme. Mother-son relationships, kannon, and so forth. There's a long list we'll go over all the details in class. Number 5, the conflicts. What is the major conflict of this story, of each of the Setsuwa? What are the dilemmas? What are the binaries that appear? Number 6, metamorphoses is an important theme in the work. Often we'll see an animal that appears who turns out to be a human, or the other way around, a human that ends up being a bewitched fox and so forth. So note each instance of metamorphoses and what they are trying to tell us about the nature of the cosmos and so forth. Number 7, metempsychosis, or rinne, is the cycle of birth and rebirth, is another important idea in Buddhism that's important in these Setsuwa as well. The return to world after death. Number 8, there are many folk elements as well, and sort of common vernacular, vulgar elements that are specific to Japanese traditions that appear in here and are kind of inserted into the Buddhist stories that came from India and China. So there's folk elements as well. Make note of those. Number 9, keep sort of map in your head of all the regions and the settings that appear in the work. Is the story set in the capital or in the countryside? If the countryside, what area of the countryside? If Kyoto, what parts of Kyoto, or Heian as it was called back then, does it take place in? Number 10, the supernatural, fantastical, magical elements appear throughout the work. Skulls, angels, dragon kings, palaces. Make note of all these as they appear. Number 11, the particularities of culture. For example, the 49th day has specific meaning in the context of Buddhism. The Kannon, Bosatsu, Tanka, and Waka poems, classical Japanese form of poetry, often appears in the works as well, in the stories as well. Mount Hiei, the Bosatsu, Fugen, dragons, goblins, the earth opening up, and so forth. And finally, note all the Shinto elements. All right, that's a very rough study guide that I've put together. We'll refine it a bit more and then go over some of the answers to those questions in class. I will see you then, and I will now turn over the microphone to my assistant, Nicole, who will read excerpts from the Yuri translation. I think I said the middle of the Heian period. Technically, it's the second half. It's toward the end of the Heian period that this was compiled. And also one more thing, anybody who's interested in looking at one of the oldest, maybe the oldest surviving version of this Konjaku Monogatarishū, I will include the link in the description below to the Suzaka, a PDF or sort of copy of the Suzaka edition, Suzaka Bon, I think it's called in Japanese, of the Konjaku Monogatarishū. Nobody knows exactly where it's from, but it's one of the oldest surviving editions of the collection, and I think it's in the one of the libraries at Waseda University. I'll put the link to there, and you can scroll through the actual text online, and you can see how it's written mostly in kanji in the old kanbun style, I think. We'll go over that in class with some hiragana mixed in with it, but we'll go over that. Bye-bye.
Tales of India, 513. How the three beasts practiced the way of the Bodhisattva, and the rabbit roasted himself. At a time now past, in India, there were three beasts, a rabbit, a fox, and a monkey. In all three, sincere aspiration for enlightenment had been aroused, so that they practiced the way of the Bodhisattva. Each one thought, It is because of the sinfulness of our former lives that in our former lives we lacked charity towards living beings. We hoarded our worldly goods and gave nothing to others. So deep were our sins that we fell into hell and endured prolonged torment, and then, through the karma that yet remained, were reborn as animals. In this life, however, let us sacrifice ourselves. Those far advanced in years, they honored as parents. Those a little their senior, they treated as older brothers. Those a little younger, they treated tenderly as younger brothers. They abandoned selfish concerns and put the welfare of others first. The god Indra saw this and thought, though their bodies are those of beasts, their minds are noble. Of the beings that are born as men, some kill living creatures, some steal other men's good, some kill father or mother, some regard their brothers as deadly enemies, some disguise evil thoughts with smiles or harbor rage behind loving countenance. How much more difficult, then, to believe that animals such as these sincerely aspire to enlightenment? I shall test them. He forthwith assumed the appearance of a man far gone in years, weak, spent, and helpless, and went to where the three beasts were staying. He said, I am old and feeble, and unable to care for myself. You there, you three beasts, feed me. I have no children. My household is poor, and I have nothing to eat. I have heard that you three beasts are deeply compassionate. Hearing him, the three beasts said, This is exactly what we had intended from the first. He must be fed immediately. The monkey climbed trees and brought back chestnuts, persimmons, pears, jujubes, tangerines, oranges, gooseberries, hazelnuts, vine plums, and akiba fruit. He went out into the fields and brought back cucumbers, eggplants, soybeans, red beans, cowpeas, and 3 kinds of millet, and had the old man eat whatever he liked. The fox went to a neighborhood where there were funeral sheds and brought back plain and fancy rice cakes, abalone and bonito, and other sorts of fish, which people had left there as offerings, and gave the old man whatever he thought would suit his taste until he was sated. Several days passed. The old man said, These two beasts have profound aspirations. They are fully bodhisattvas. Meanwhile, the rabbit, filled with eager striving, took a torch, took incense, pricked his ears up and arched his back, widened his eyes and flexed his forelegs and opened the gap in his hindquarters, scampering north, south, east, west in search of food, but obtained nothing at all. And so the monkey and the fox and the old man on one hand shamed him, and on the other hand laughed him to scorn. They egged him on, but his powers did not suffice. The rabbit thought, I might go to the fields and mountains to look for food, but the fields and mountains are full of danger. I would be killed by men or devoured by beasts. I would only be wasting my life. It would be far better if I were now to sacrifice my body, be eaten by this old man, and depart this present birth forever. He went to the old man and said, Now I am going out to look for delicacies. While you wait, please gather wood and light a fire. And so the monkey gathered wood, and the fox brought the fire and lit the wood, and they waited to see if the rabbit might possibly bring anything. The rabbit brought nothing. When the monkey and the fox saw him, they said, We wondered what you would bring. It was just as we thought all along. You lied to us and fooled us into making a fire so you could warm yourself. How disgusting. The rabbit said, I haven't the power to find food and bring it back, but I will roast my own body for him to eat. And he leaped into the fire and was burned to death. And then the god Indra resumed his original form and transferred to the moon the shape of the rabbit in the fire. He put this image on the moon to show all sentient beings everywhere. And so, what looks like a cloud on the surface of the moon is the smoke from the fire in which the rabbit was roasting. And when people talk about the rabbit in the moon, they mean this image of a rabbit. You myriad folk, whenever you look at the moon, you should think of the story of this rabbit. Tales of China 9-4. How someone in Luzhou killed a neighbor and was not punished. At a time now past, in Luzhou in China, there were 2 brothers who had the same father and different mothers. The elder lost both father and mother in childhood. The younger brother's mother raised him along with her own son. It is only to be expected that a mother will expend care on the instruction and nurture of her own child, but as for the stepson, he received even better care from his stepmother than from a real mother. Now, a neighbor got drunk, came to their home, and heaped abuse on the mother. The boys hit him to teach him a lesson, and soon he was dead under their blows. Despite the gravity of the crime, out of consideration for their mother, the boys did not flee, but remained in the house with the gate open. Policemen came to arrest them, and were about to put them to death, when the older brother said, It is I who have committed the crime. I should be executed at once. My brother is not to blame. Likewise, the younger brother said, My brother had nothing to do with the killing. I am the murderer, and so you must execute me. Each offered to yield up his life in place of the other. The policeman thought this strange, exceedingly strange, and unable to decide on the spot who was the guilty one, went back to inform the king. The king said, "Call the mother and examine her." The woman came in response to the summons. "Why is it," she was asked, "that each of your children at once offers to die in place of the other, and neither one begrudges his own life?" The woman said, "The fault is mine alone. I was the one who taught the boys. I caused them to kill." The king said, "There is a limit to the responsibility for a crime. You cannot take your children's offense upon yourself or suffer their punishment. Both sons ought by rights to be put to death, but I will execute one and pardon the other. Tell me now, which child do you love and which do you hate?" The woman said, "The younger of these two boys is my child, and the older is my husband's by his first wife. As their father lay dying, he said to me, his wife, 'This child of mine has no mother, and I too am about to die. He will be all alone and have no one to look after him, and I am troubled.' I replied, 'You may be sure that I will be as a mother to your child, just as you asked me to. You don't need to worry on his account.' The father heard those words and died happy. I cannot be false to them, and so I would rather that my own child be killed and my husband's child be allowed to go free." Hearing her, the king was so moved by her faithfulness that he pardoned both, and the woman in great joy led the two sons back home. The woman who would have let her own son be killed to obtain the release of her stepson rather than break a promise had a rare heart. Everyone who heard of this praised her, so the tale's been told, and so it's been handed down. Buddhist Tales from Japan, 14.3. How a monk of the Dojoji in the province of Ki copied the Lotus Sutra and brought salvation to serpents. At a time now past, there were two monks on pilgrimage to Kumano. One was well along in years, the other was young and extraordinarily good-looking. When they came to Muro district, the two of them regarded lodgings and settled down for the night. The owner of the house was a widow and young, with 2 or 3 maids her only companions. When this woman saw the handsome young monk who had taken lodgings with her, her lustful desires were deeply aroused. She tended assiduously to his comfort. Night fell, and the monks went to bed. At midnight, she secretly crept to where the young monk was sleeping, covered him with her dress, and lay down beside him. She nudged him awake. He opened his eyes in fright and confusion. "I never give lodging to travelers," said the woman, "but I let you stay here tonight because from the time I first saw you, this afternoon, I have longed to make you my spouse. I thought that by taking you for the night I would achieve my aim, and now I have come to you. My husband is dead, and I am now a widow. Take pity on me." Hearing her, the monk got up, terrified. He replied, "I have a long-standing vow. In accordance with it, in recent days I have purified myself in mind and body, and set out on the distant journey to present myself before the deity of Kumano. Should I carelessly break my vow here, the consequences would be dreadful for both of us. Abandon all such thoughts at once." He refused with all the strength in his command. The woman was greatly vexed, and all night long she kept embracing him and teasing him and fondling him. The monk tried this argument and that argument to soothe her. "It is not that I refuse, my lady, but just now I'm on a pilgrimage to Kumano. I'll spend a few days there offering lamps and paper strips. Then, when I've turned homeward, I will do as you ask," he promised. The woman believed him and went back to her own bed. At daybreak, the monks left the house and set out for Kumano. The woman reckoned up the day of his promised return. She could think of nothing but her love for the monk and made all sorts of preparations in anticipation. But turning homeward, he stayed away for fear of her. He took a road that she did not expect him to take and thus slipped past. She waited until she was weary, but he did not come, and she went to the side of the road and questioned passing travelers. Among them was a monk who had set out from Kumano. "There was a young monk and an old one, dressed in robes of such and such a color," and she described them. "Have they started homeward?" "It is 3 days now since those two went home," said the monk. Hearing this, she struck her hands together. "He's taken another road and fled," she thought. In great rage, she returned to her house and shut herself into her bedroom. She stayed there a little while without making a sound, and then she died. Her maidservants, who witnessed this, were weeping and wailing, when a poisonous snake 40 feet long suddenly issued from her bedroom. It went out of the house and towards the road. Then it slithered rapidly down the road by which pilgrims returned from Kumano. People saw it and were filled with terror. The two monks had had a head start, but someone came up to them unasked and said, "Behind you a strange thing is happening? A serpent has appeared that is 40 feet long. It crosses mountains and fields and is coming rapidly closer." At this the two monks thought, undoubtedly, because the promise to her was broken, the mistress of that house let evil passions arise within her heart and became a poisonous snake and pursues us. Taking to their heels, they ran as fast as they could to a temple called Dojoji, and went in through the gate. "Why have you run here?" asked the monks of the temple. The two told them the story in great detail and begged to be saved. The monks of the temple took counsel together. Then they lowered a bell and concealed the young monk inside it, and shut the gate. The old monk hid himself in company with the monks of the temple. After a little while, the serpent came to the temple. The gates were shut. No matter, she crossed over them and entered the compound. She went all around the halls once, twice, and when she came to the door of the bell hall where the monk was sheltering, she rapped on it 100 times with her tail. In the end, she smashed the leaves of the door and entered. She encircled the bell and beat upon the dragon head at the top with her tail. This lasted 5 or 6 hours. For all their fear, the monks were so amazed that they opened the doors on all 4 sides and gathered to watch. Tears of blood flowed from her eyes. Raising her head, she licked her lips and slithered rapidly away from whence she came. Before the eyes of the monks, the great bell of the temple blazed and was burned in the poisonous hot breath of the serpent. It was too hot to come near, but they threw water on it to cool it, and when they lifted it away to look at the monk, they saw that fire had consumed him utterly. Not even his skeleton remained. All that there was a little ash. Upon seeing this, the old monk returned home amidst his tears. Later, an aged monk, who was the senior monk of the temple, had a dream in which a serpent even larger than the one before came straight to him and addressed him face to face. "Do you know who I am? I am the monk who was hidden inside the bell. The evil woman became a poisonous snake. In the end, I was made her captive and became her husband. I have been reborn in this vile, filthy body and suffer measureless torment. I now hope to free myself of this pain, but my own powers are insufficient. And even though I honored the Lotus Sutra when I was alive, I thought that if only you, holy sir, would bestow on us the vastness of your mercy, I might escape this pain. I beseech you, on our account, let limitless compassion arise within your heart. In purity, copy the chapter of the Lotus Sutra called The Limitless Life of the Tathagata. Dedicate its merit to us, two serpents, and free us thereby from our torments. Except by the power of the Lotus Sutra, how are we to escape them?" Thus he spoke and departed. The monk awoke from his dream. When the monk pondered this afterwards, his piety was at once aroused. He copied himself out of the chapter and discarded his robe and bowl. He invited a great many monks to celebrate a full day's Dharma assembly and dedicated its merit that the two serpents might be freed of their torments. Later, he dreamed that a monk and a woman, their happy faces wreathed in smiles, came to the dojoji and saluted him reverently. "Because you have cultivated the roots of enlightenment, we too were instantly rid of our snakes' bodies and set on the path of felicitous rebirth. The woman was reborn into the Triads Rilsa heaven, and the monk has ascended to the Tusita heaven." Having spoken, they departed separately, ascending into the sky. The monk awoke from his dream. The aged monk rejoiced deeply, and he revered all the more the miraculous power of the Lotus Sutra. In truth, the Sutra's wonder-working powers are uncanny. That the serpents cast off their serpents' bodies and reborn afresh in the heavens is due solely to the Lotus Sutra. Everyone who witnessed this affair or heard of it was moved to belief in the Lotus Sutra and copied and chanted it. Rare, too, was the heart of the aged monk. To have done such a compassionate deed, he must in a previous life had been their wise and good friend. Now think, that evil woman's passion for the young monk must have also come from a bond formed in a previous life. You see, therefore, the strength of the evil in the female heart. It is for this reason that the Buddha strictly forbids approaching women. Know this and avoid them. So the tale's been told, and so it's been handed down. 1617. How Kaya no Yoshifuji of Bichu province became the husband of a fox and was saved by Kannon. At a time now past, in the village of Ashimori, in Kaya district of Bichu province, there lived a man named Kaya no Yoshifuji. His household had gotten rich through the trade in coin. He had a weakness for women and was prey to lustful thoughts. Now, in autumn of the 8th year of Kanpei, while his wife was away in the capital and he, left by himself and his household, was temporarily a widower, he went out for a stroll just at nightfall and suddenly caught sight of a beautiful young woman. She was someone he had never seen before. His lustful feelings were aroused, but the woman looked as though she would flee if he tried to touch her. He went up to her and took her by the hand. "Who are you?" he asked. She was brilliantly dressed, but she said, "I'm no one." How charming she looked as she said that. "Come to my house," said Yoshifuji. "That would be unseemly," she said, and tried to draw away. "Where do you live, then?" said Yoshifuji. "I'll go with you." "Just over there," she said, walking on. Yoshifuji walked with her, holding her hand. Close by there was a handsome house. Inside, too, it was sumptuously furnished. "Odd," thought Yoshifuji. "I never knew there was anything like this here." Within there was a great clamor, as men and women, persons of every degree, together cried, "Her ladyship's come." This must be the daughter of the house, Yoshifuji thought delightedly, and that night he slept with her. The master of the house appeared. "Congratulations," he said to Yoshifuji. "This bond was predestined. Now you must stay with us." Yoshifuji was treated very hospitably. He became utterly attached to the woman. They vowed eternal love, and waking and sleeping he spent all his time with her. He never wondered how his house and children might be faring. In his own home, when he had not reappeared after nightfall, people thought, maybe he's crawling around somewhere in secret, it's his usual way. But when it was quite dark and he had still not reappeared, there was someone who took it amiss. "What a madman he is! Have the servants look for him." The night was more than half gone, but though they searched the neighborhood, he was not to be found. Could he have gone on a journey? But his clothing was still there. He had disappeared wearing only a light jacket. Day broke and the uproar continued. They looked everywhere that he might have gone, but found absolutely nothing. If he were a young man with unsettled ideas, he might have gone off suddenly to become a monk. But at his age? It's a very strange prank, if it is one. Meanwhile, where Yoshifuji was living, the years passed. His wife was pregnant, and after 9 months she gave birth, without complications, to a son, so that he became even more deeply attached to her. It seemed to him indeed that time was passing swiftly. Everything in his life was just as he desired it. In his own home, after he disappeared, he was sought for, but without success. His older brother, the senior officer Toyonaka, and his younger brothers, the supervisor Toyokage and Toyotsune, who was the priest of the Kibitsuhiko shrine, and Yoshifuji's only son, Tadasada, were all affluent men. In their mutual grief, they decided to at least try to discover his corpse. Good resolves arose in them, and they felled a kaya tree to make an image of the 11-headed Kannon. The statue they made was the same height as Yoshifuji. They petitioned it. At least let us see his corpse, they pleaded. Moreover, from the day on which he disappeared, they began invocations of the Buddha and sutra readings for the welfare of his soul in the next world. A layman who walked off with the staff suddenly came into the house where Yoshifuji was now living. At the sight of him, the whole household, from the master on down, fell into utter terror and fled. The layman jabbed Yoshifuji in the back with his staff, forcing him out through a narrow passageway. At twilight on the 13th day after Yoshifuji's disappearance, his people were mourning him. "What a strange way he has disappeared! And it was just about this time of night, wasn't it?" they were saying to each other, when from underneath the storehouse in front of them a strange, black, monkey-like creature crawled out on all fours. "What's this? What's this?" They crowded in to look at it. "It's me," said the thing. And the voice was Yoshifuji's. His son, Tadasada, thought it uncanny, but since it was so obviously his father's voice, he dropped to the ground and pulled him up. "What happened to you?" he said. Yoshifuji said, "It was while I was a widower and by myself. All the time I kept thinking how much I wanted to have a woman. And then, unexpectedly, I became the son-in-law of a high-ranking gentleman. During the years I've lived in his household, I've gotten a son. He's a beautiful child. I held him in my arms day and night and wouldn't let go of him ever. I'm going to make him my heir. You, Tadasada, I'll make my second son. That's to show my regard for his mother's high rank." Tadasada heard this and said, "Where's your young son, sir?" "Over there," said Yoshifuji and pointed to the storehouse. Tadasada and the rest of the company were dumbfounded. They saw that Yoshifuji had the appearance of a man emancipated by severe illness, and they saw that he had on the clothes that he was wearing when he disappeared. They had a servant look under the floor of the storehouse. A lot of foxes were there. That was the place where Yoshifuji had lain. When they saw this, they understood it all. Yoshifuji had been tricked by a fox that had become her husband and was no longer in his right mind. They immediately summoned an eminent monk to pray for him and called in a yin-yang master to exorcise the evil influences, and they had Yoshifuji bathed repeatedly. Afterwards, little by little, he returned to his senses. How ashamed he must have been, and how queer he must have felt. Yoshifuji had been under the storehouse for 13 days, but to him it had seemed 13 years. Moreover, the beams under the storehouse were only 4 or 5 inches above the ground. To Yoshifuji, they had seemed high and broad. He had thought himself in a great house that one went in and out of freely. It was all because of the magic power of the spirit foxes. As for the layman who entered and struck about with his cane, he was a transformation of the Kannon that had been made and dedicated to Yoshifuji's welfare. This shows why everyone should invoke and meditate on Kannon. Yoshifuji lived more than 10 years without illness and died in his 61st year. This story was told to the imperial advisor Miyoshi no Kiyotsura when he was governor of Bichu. So the tale's been told, and so it's been handed down. 1628. How a pilgrim to Hatsune acquired riches through Kannon's aid. At a time now past, there was a young samurai in the capital who had no father, mother, wife, children, or friends. He went to Hatsue and addressed the statue of Kannon. "I am a poor man with no resources at all. If my whole future is going to be like this, I'll starve myself to death in front of you. If there is any chance that you might help me a little, tell me so in a dream. I'll never leave here unless you answer me." He prostrated himself and lay face down. "Who are you, talking this way?" the monks at the temple demanded. "We don't see that you have anything to eat. You would defile the temple if you died here. Who is your master?" "I am a poor man. How could I have a master? Kannon is the only one I can rely on. I don't have anything at all to eat," he said. The monks assembled in conference. "This man Kannon by refusing to go away. It could be a serious matter for the temple. We'd better all see that he gets fed," they decided. They took turns feeding him. Thus sustained, he never left his place in front of the image, but stayed there resolutely day and night for thrice 7 days. Toward dawn on the 21st night, the man had a dream in which a monk emerged from inside the curtains to speak to him. "It is exceedingly improper of you to pester Kannon like this, just as if you didn't know that your poverty is the result of sins in a former life. But the Bodhisattva will give you a little help for compassionate reasons. When you leave the temple, keep whatever touches your hand. Be aware that it is a gift you are receiving," he said. After that, the man awoke. Next, the man went to ask for food at the cell of the monk who had befriended him. He ate and started off. At the main gate, he tripped and fell on his face. When he rose, supporting himself with his hands, he clutched something that proved to be a piece of straw. How could this be the Bodhisattva's gift, he thought, but he started home with it because of the dream. Meanwhile, a new day dawned. As the man went on his way, a bothersome horsefly began to circle around his face. He broke off a branch from a tree and chased it away, but it came back again. He caught it by the leg, tied it in the middle of his piece of straw, and carried it along. Bound at the waist, the insect made frantic efforts to fly. Presently, an aristocratic lady from the capital came riding towards the man in a carriage. She was accompanied by a pretty young child who was sitting with the blind rolled up. "What's that man carrying?" "Ask him to give it to me," the child said. The samurai on horseback came over to the man. "You there. The young master wants the thing you're carrying. Give it to me." "This was a present from Kanon, but since it's called for in this way, I'll give it to you." The man handed it over. "He was very nice about giving it up," said the people inside the carriage, and so they offered him 3 big tangerines, wrapped in fragrant, thick, white crepe paper. "You're probably thirsty. Eat these," they told him. A single piece of straw has turned into 3 big tangerines, the man thought. He tied the fruit to a branch, shouldered it, and went on. After a time, the man saw an important-looking gentleman who was traveling incognito, making a pilgrimage on foot to Hatsuse with a group of samurai. The gentleman was stumbling with fatigue. "My throat is parched. Give me some water to drink. I feel faint," he said. In great agitation, the members of the party rushed around looking for water nearby, but there was none to be had. Just as they were at their wits' end, the man with the tangerine strolled up. "Do you know a place near here where there's clean water?" they asked. "There's no water nearby." "What's the matter?" the man said. "Someone on his way to Hatsuse is tired from walking around and his throat is dry. We're looking for water. I have 3 tangerines." "I'll give them to you," he said. They awakened the master, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep, and gave him the tangerines. "A fellow here is giving you his tangerines." "I was dying of thirst," the master said. He ate the tangerines. "I would probably have fallen by the roadside if it hadn't been for these." "What splendid luck." "Where is the fellow?" he said. "He's here. What can I do to make him happy? Have our people brought up the food? Send him on his way with a meal." No sooner had the man's instructions been conveyed to the man that some people came into sight leading pack animals. They proceeded to erect curtains and lay mats and preparations for the noonday meal. They also fed the man. The master gave the man 3 bolts of spotless cloth, my appreciation for those tangerines. "It's impossible to repay you adequately while I am traveling. This is a mere token of what I intend to do for you. I live at such and such place in the capital. Be sure to call on me there," he said. The man took the cloth, put it under his arm, and went on in high spirits. "Kanon must be helping me," he thought. At nightfall he sought shelter in a small dwelling near the road. When dawn came, he jumped up and continued his journey. During the hour of the dragon, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., he met a man on a fine horse who was loitering along the way, putting the beast lovingly through its paces. As he watched in admiration, the horse suddenly collapsed and expired. The dismayed owner dismounted, tore off the saddle, and tried to think of something to do, but it was all in vain. The horse was dead. The owner transferred the saddle to a nag from his entourage and rode off, vexed enough to clasp his hands and weep. One of the owner's servants had been left behind with orders to drag the body away and hide it. The man with the cloth walked up to him when he was standing guard over the dead animal. "What kind of horse could it be that it would die so suddenly?" he asked. The master thought he had a real treasure when he brought it to the capital from Mutsu province. Lots of people offered to pay anything he asked for it, but he wouldn't give it up, and now he hasn't even got 2 bolts of cloth out of it. I'd like to skin off the hide at least, but I don't know what I could do with it while we're on this trip, so I'm just standing here guarding the carcass. I was thinking what a wonderful horse it was when it dropped dead. Living things are strange. I don't suppose you could dry the hide right away, even if you did take it off. I live around here. I can take it off and put it to some use. Give the horse to me and go on home," the man said. He offered him a bolt of cloth. "This is a gain I didn't expect," the servant thought. He seized the cloth and took to his heels like a fugitive, afraid the man might reconsider. The man must have bought the dead horse because he thought, "Thanks to Kanan's oracle, I got a piece of straw that changed into 3 tangerines. Then the tangerines became 3 bolts of cloth. Maybe this dead horse will come back to life, and the 3 bolts of cloth will turn into a horse." He washed his hands, rinsed his mouth, and bowed towards Hatsuse. "If this has happened through your aid, restore the horse to life at once," he prayed. The horse opened his eyes, raised its head, and tried to get up. The man went over, took hold of it, and helped it to its feet. In great glee, he led it to a secluded spot in case anyone happened along, and there he let it rest until the end of the hour. When it had returned to its old self, he led it to a local house, exchanged a bolt of cloth for a cheap saddle, mounted, and started off towards the capital. The sun set while he was in the vicinity of Uji, so he stopped at a house and converted his last bolt of cloth into food and horse fodder. When morning came, he went on to the capital. In the neighborhood of Kujo Avenue, he noticed a house where people were hurrying around as though someone were setting out on business. "If I take this horse farther into the city, someone may recognize it and accuse me of stealing it. That would be awkward. I think I'll go sell it here. A horse is a necessity at a place where a person is setting out on a trip," he thought. He dismounted and went over to the house. Would you like to buy a horse? He asked. The master had just been looking for a mount. He was delighted to see such a splendid beast. I don't happen to have any silk cloth on hand at the moment, he said. Would you be willing to exchange it for some fields in a paddy area south of here, plus a little rice? I need silk cloth, but I'll do as you ask because you need a horse, the man said. The master mounted, tried the horse out, and found it ideal. He bought it for 2.5 acres of fields in his Kujo paddy area, plus a little rice. After arranging about the bills of sale, the man went on to stay in the house of an acquaintance in the capital, where he used the rice to feed himself. 2 months later, when the rice was gone, he agreed to let a local farmer cultivate his fields in exchange for half the crop, which became his source of sustenance. The man went on to establish a household and lead a happy life, blessed by one piece of good luck after another. Well aware that he owed everything to the Hatsusei canon, he made constant pilgrimages to the temple. This shows that Kanon's miracles have few parallels, so the tale has been told, and so it has been handed down. Secular Tales of Japan, 2838. How Fujiwara no Nobutada, governor of Shinano, took a tumble. At Misaka at a time now past, there was a man named Fujiwara no Nobutada, who was governor of Shinano. He had journeyed to Shinano upon his appointment and, having served his term, was returning to the capital. He rode in the midst of a long procession, pack horses loaded with his goods, his retainers, more men than you could count, on horseback. As he was crossing the suspension bridge at Misaka, his horse caught a hind foot on a plank at the rim and slipped and fell. Horse and rider together went tumbling head over heels into the ravine. The ravine was immeasurably deep, and it seemed therefore scarcely likely that the governor could still be alive. Far below could be seen the topmost branches of 100-foot cypresses and cedars, but try as they might, none of his men could tell how much farther it was to the ground. No, they thought, there was not the faintest chance that the governor could be unharmed after such a fall. They all dismounted and, kneeling in a row at the rim of the bridge, peered helplessly into the depths. It's hopeless. If only there was somewhere not too steep so we could climb down and find out what happened to him. We'll have to go on for another day and circle back from the shallow end to look for him. There's no way at all to get down there. One after another, all were exclaiming in dismay, and then faintly, from far below, a shout was heard. That was his lordship the governor, they said, and gave an answering yell. By listening intently, they could just make out his words. He's telling us something. Everyone listen. What is it? He says we're to let down a travel hamper on a long rope. They knew now that the governor was alive. Something had broken his fall. A great many men collected their reins, tied them end to end, and fastened them to the hamper, which they lowered in all haste. The rope was paid out until none was left. Only then did it begin to go slack. It must have hit bottom, they thought. From the depths of the ravine came the voice. Now pull it up. He's telling us to pull, they said. The hamper seemed extraordinarily light as they reeled it up. How light it is. Surely it should be heavier if the governor is in it, they said. It must be that he's catching hold of branches as he rises, someone suggested. All pulled together. Drawn the basket all the way up, they saw that it held nothing but mushrooms. They stared into each other's faces uncomprehendingly. What on earth? They said. Once more there was a shout heard from below. All right, let it down again. And so they did. Again they heard the shout to pull it up. They obeyed, and this time the hamper was extremely heavy. Many men heaved at the rope to reel it in. This time, indeed, the governor was riding in the hamper. With one hand he was clutching the rope. In the other he carried 3 clusters of mushrooms. He was hoisted up and set down on the bridge amidst the general rejoicing. Sir, are these some special kind of mushrooms? The retainers asked him. The governor replied, At the time of the fall, my horse went straight down into the bottom of the ravine. I found myself spinning through the air after him when, unexpectedly, I fell into a dense tangle of branches. I grabbed at them until I came to rest against a large branch below. Using it as a foothold, I made my way to the fork of the tree and stayed there with my arms around the trunk. So many mushrooms are growing on that tree that I couldn't take my eyes on them. I just took the ones within easy reach and had you haul them up in the hamper. But there must be a lot left. More than I know how to say, in fact. It's a terrible loss, and I feel it keenly. Oh, indeed, sir, a great loss, said the retainers, and burst out laughing together. Don't talk nonsense, said the governor. You fellers are the kind who would climb a mountain of jewels and come back empty-handed, I can see that. You know the saying, A governor can't stumble without snatching a handful of dirt. His senior deputy was inwardly repelled, but said, "Right you are, sir. How could you fail to take whatever might come into your hands? It might be expected of anyone, but only a man endowed with your innate sagacity would carry on unperturbed in the face of death and pick mushrooms quite as though nothing were in the least amiss. To your heart's content. That's why the people of the province love and cherish you like a parent. And so, what can we do but congratulate you?" The speech went on and on as the others secretly burst into guffaws. Now think. Such was the governor's greed that even in straits like these his first thought was for the mushrooms. He picked them and set them up without a tremor of fear. You can imagine, therefore, what he was like when the opportunities for gain were easier. How people who heard this must have detested him, and how they must have laughed. So the tale's been told, and so it's been handed down. 29:18. How a thief climbed into the upper story of Rasho Gate and saw a corpse. At a time now past, there was a man who had come to the capital from the direction of Setsu province in order to steal. The sun was still high, so he concealed himself beneath Rasho Gate. Shujaku Avenue, to the north, was thronged, and he stood there waiting for the street to become quiet. But then as he waited, he heard a great many people approaching from the other direction, and to avoid being seen by them, he climbed secretly to the upper story. There he saw the faint light of a torch. This was strange, the thief thought, and he peered through the lattices. A torch had been lit at her pillow, and who was plucking lead. The thief saw, but could not comprehend. Could these be an oni, he wondered? He was afraid, but he thought, they may only be ghosts. I'll try scaring them off. He quietly opened the door and drew his sword. You there, he cried, and rushed in upon them. The crone cowered in confusion and rubbed her hands together. Who are you, old woman, and what are you doing here? The thief asked. I lost my mistress, sir, she said, and as there was no one to bury her, I brought her here. See what nice long hair she has? I'm plucking it out to make a wig. Spare me! Stole the hair. He ran to the ground and made his getaway. There used to be a lot of corpses in the upper story of that gate. It's a fact that when people died, and for some reason or another couldn't be buried, they were brought there. The thief told someone what had happened, and whoever heard this story passed it on. So the tale's been told, and so it's been handed down. 23. How a man who was accompanying his wife to Tamba province got trussed up at Oyeyama. At a time now past, a man who lived in the capital had a wife who came from Tamba province. He accompanied her on a journey to Tamba. The husband had his wife ride their horse, while he himself walked along behind, keeping guard, with his quiver with 10 arrows on his back and a bow on his hand. Not far from Oyeyama, there fell in with them a brawny-looking young man with a sword at his waist. They walked along together, each inquiring politely where the other was going, and chatting about this and that. The new man, the one with the sword, said, This is a famous sword that I'm wearing, an heirloom from Mutsu province. Look at it. And he unsheathed it. In truth, it was a magnificent blade, and when the husband saw it, he wanted it above all things. The new man saw the expression on his face and said, Do you want this sword? I'll trade it for that bow you're carrying. The man with the bow knew his bow to be of no great value, while the sword was exceptionally fine. But with his desire for the sword and his greed for a profitable bargain, he made the exchange without a second thought. Well then, as they were walking along, the new man said, I look ridiculous carrying a bow and nothing else. While we're in the mountains, lend me a couple of arrows. After all, sir, we're traveling together, so it's all the same where you're concerned. To the first man this seemed reasonable enough. He was in high good humor with his bow for a valuable sword, and so he took out 2 arrows and handed them over as he'd been asked. The new man walked behind, the bow and 2 arrows readily in his grip. The first man walked ahead, with the sword at his waist and the useless quiver on. After a time, the travelers went into a grove to have their afternoon meal. The new man said, It's not nice to eat where people can see. Let's go on a little. And so they went deep into the trees. Then, just as the husband had put his arms around his wife to lift her from the horse, the other man suddenly fitted an arrow to his bow, aimed at him, and pulled it taut. I'll shoot if you move, he said. The first man hadn't expected anything at all like this and stood looking at him dumbfounded. The other threatened him. Go on into the mountains, go on. Afraid for his life, he went on with his wife, perhaps half a mile further into the mountains. Throw away your sword and knife, the other commanded, and he threw them away. The other man approached, picked them up and knocked them down, and tied him fast to a tree with bridle rope. Then this man went up to the woman and looked at her closely. She was 20 or a little older, and of humble station but adorably pretty. Her beauty aroused his desire, and forgetting any other purpose, he made her take off her clothes. Then he too undressed and embraced her and lay with her. The way, all while her husband watched in his tresses. What must he have thought? Afterwards, the man arose, dressed himself as before, strapped the quiver on his back and the sword to his waist, and, bow in hand, hoisted himself onto the horse. To the woman he said, "I'm sorry, but I must go away. I have no choice. As a favor to you, I'll spare your husband's life. I'm taking the horse so I can make a quick escape." And he galloped away, no one knows where. After that, the wife went up to her husband and freed his bonds. He looked stupefied. "You wretch," she exclaimed. "You good-for-nothing coward. From this day forward, I'll never trust you again." Her husband said not a word, and together they went to Tanba. The rapist had a sense of shame, for after all he did not rob the woman of her clothes. But the husband was a worthless fool in the mountains. To hand his bow and arrows to someone he'd never before laid eyes on was surely the height of stupidity. No one knows what became of the other man. So the tale goes, and so it's been handed down. 35. How a poor man left his wife, and how she became the wife of the governor of Setsu. At a time now past, there was in the capital a man of no special standing. He had no friends, and neither parents nor relations, and having nowhere of his own to lodge, he went to others for employment. But since none of his masters paid him the attention he thought he deserved, he went from place to place, always in hope of something better, to serve a noble family, and he had no way of earning a living. His wife was young and good-looking, a woman of refined temperament who clung loyally to her impoverished husband. In the depths of his anxiety, he told her, "I thought that we would spend our whole lives together, but with every passing day I become poorer. I wonder if our marriage is not the cause of my misfortune. How would it be if we were to go our separate ways?" His wife disagreed. "Good and ill fortune comes from the karma of our previous lives. I was willing to starve with you if need be, but it is hopeless to go on this way, and if you really think our marriage might be the cause, let us try separating." This was what the man wanted, and amidst tears and vows of eternal love, they parted. Afterwards, the wife, being young and good-looking, found employment at the house of a man, whose name is no longer known. Since she was a woman of refinement, he used her with great kindness, and when his wife died, he called her to serve him intimately. He had her sleep by his side and became fond of her. As time passed, he came to treat his mistress as his wife and entrusted all his household affairs to her. Meanwhile, this man became the governor of Setsu. The woman passed her years in ever-increasing prosperity. Her original husband had thought his luck might improve if he were separated from her, but instead he fell on even harder times. In the end, he was unable to remain in the capital, and in the course of his wanderings went to Setsu province. He became a mere farmhand whom others hired, doing peasants' work, tilling the fields and cutting wood. His employers sent him to the bay of Naniwa to cut reeds. His wife went to Setsu province. By Naniwa Bay they halted their carriage to enjoy the view. With their numerous retainers and followers they ate and drank and amused themselves. The wife sat in the carriage with her ladies, admiring the view and the interesting and charming spectacles it offered. There were a great many people of the lower class cutting reeds, and among them one who, though of the same class, seemed somehow to be of finer stuff. The governor's wife saw him and stared. How strangely like her former husband he was. Perhaps she was mistaken, she thought, and looked harder, but it was indeed he. He made a strange figure, standing there cutting reeds. What a pitiful wretch he was, she thought. Surely he must be suffering for the sins of a previous life. Tears welled up, but pretending that nothing was amiss, she summoned a servant. "There's a certain man among the reed cutters," she said, describing him. "Call him over." The messenger ran. "You there, over to their honor's carriage," he said. It was so unexpected that the man just gaped at him in astonishment. "Hurry up," the messenger shouted. Scared, the man dropped the reeds he had cut, thrust his scythe into his belt, and went up to the carriage. Observing him from close by, she knew that it truly was he. He wore a hemp shirt, black with filth and without sleeves, that scarcely reached his knees. A soiled cloth covered his head. Earth clung to his face, to his hands and feet. He was utterly filthy. Leeches were sucking at the backs of his knees and his shanks, exposing the raw flesh. The governor's lady saw him with pity and revulsion, and she had one of her people give him food and sake. She squatted in front of her carriage, eating, and found it repellent. To her maid she said, "This man seems of a better class than the other reed cutters. I feel sorry for him." And she had someone take a robe from within the carriage with instructions to give it to him. On a scrap of paper that accompanied the robe, she wrote, "I'll be fortunate, you thought, and so we parted. So why, then, do you live by Naniwa-be? The man received the robe. The gift was entirely unexpected. Looking at it in wonderment, he saw a scrap of paper with something written on it, and when he took that and saw what was written, he thought, "Why, this is my former wife." How sad and shameful was his destiny, he now realized. "Give me your inkstone," he said. She gave it to him, and this is what he wrote. "Without you, I'm unfortunate indeed. I know how hard it is to live by Naniwa-be." When the governor's lady saw this, she pitied him even more. The man cut no more reeds but ran away and hid. Afterwards, the lady never spoke of this to anyone. Everything is reward or retribution for the deeds of our previous lives. It is ignorance that makes a man. The story must have been told by the governor's lady in her old age. So the tale goes, and so it will be handed down for generations to come. Translation adapted from Marian Uri. I'll cut that out later.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Shit. Is it recording?
Yes.
Gotta run to class.
Alright. Here he goes. Alright. Let's do this. But turning homeward. Oh my god. A serpent has a purred? Oh. She went all around the halls twice. Once. Ouchie. This is gonna need some heavy editing. Hooey.